I told him, I said, don't you have to like GPS? Can't you like get off the other side and like find some other way? He goes, I'm trying to read it.
Good evening. Welcome to the monthly meeting of Athens-Clarke County, our agenda setting meeting. We appreciate you joining us and your participation and interest in the proceedings of your local government. Prior to our agenda setting meeting, we have a special call session, and immediately following the meeting, we'll have an executive session. There are agendas on the table just to the right and to the outside the doors as you go out. And if you're watching remotely, you may get an agenda from Athens-ClarkeCounty.com. No final action will be taken on agenda items tonight. Items on tonight's agenda will be discussed and moved to our business meeting for November the 7th for consideration and vote. If you have a cell phone or any other electronic device, please turn it off or to silent. And if you have any handouts you'd like to share with us, if you'll give them to Mr. Berryman, he'll be sure that we have them. Our rules of the commission allow 3 minutes for public input. There's a timing clock on Ms. Spratlin's desk that will be green when you start. It will turn yellow when you have 5 seconds left, so please have your remarks finished so that there won't be a need to interrupt you. There are 3 opportunities for citizen input this evening. The first will be on a contract award, which is the only item on our special call meeting agenda. The second is our consent items, which items 1 through 7. And the third is old and new business, number 8 through 17. I'll let you know as these opportunities are available. We don't take any public input on our Planning Commission recommendations at agenda setting meetings. There'll be a public hearing on these items, which will be held prior to the business meeting on November the 7th. We'll now move on to our special call meeting. Ms. Spratlin, will you call the roll for us, please?
Dickerson.
Here.
Samms.
Here.
Ling. Here. Wright. Bailey.
Present.
Neesmith.
Here.
Bale. Here. Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
Thank you. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to award a contract for defined benefit, pension, and other post-employment benefits. Is there any citizen who would like to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail.
Madam Mayor, I move for suspension of rules.
I'll second
Thank you.
that.
Have a motion and a second for suspension of rules. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, anyone like to discuss or make a motion on our one item on this?
Just quickly, Madam Mayor, the reason for this action is the fact that the Hay Group that used to represent us as our actuary was bought out by Corn Ferry, and as a result, they wanted to go into a 5-year contract, and it violated our policies in terms of contractual agreement. So there was a RFP sent out. We interviewed the staff. Looked at a number of people, and you have them listed here on the report, and it was culled down to 2. We interviewed the 2. I sat in on the interviews. We interviewed the 2, and Aon Hewitt was the one that basically met every need that we wanted and that we were looking for, and looking for things in the future that this government can use. So it is the recommendation coming from the pension board. We had a pension board meeting on the 12th and that's to deal with the pension portion of that. And the total recommendation coming from is to approve Aon Hewitt as the vendor for a 3-year contract with two 1-year options. And I'll make that as a motion.
I'll second it, Madam Mayor, and make a comment if I
Sure.
could. Aon is the company that's responsible for the University System of Georgia Board of Regents pension plan. I've had some experience with them, and they've been incredibly responsive, knowledgeable, and have the infrastructure to do an excellent job. So I think this is a very good move.
Great, thank you. Have a motion, second. Any further discussion?
I'd like to point something out.
Yes, sir.
I was asked this by Commissioner Dickerson and had the same question for our staff, and Bill and I have talked about this subsequently. So as you'll notice in the agenda report, there's 5-year pricing that gives us a $25,000 thereabouts discount. But yet you're being asked to do 3-year commitment with 2 renewables. And so we need to reconcile that. And Bill, after we talked today, I think you felt like the contract that has been given to us by Aon Hewitt with modifications, if that is to be approved to form, even though we do have some out clauses, we should be eligible for this 5-year discount. And the fact is that they're going to front load some work. And so we're going to have to pay for that work. You know, they're smoothing it over several years, but if they do that experience study, if they do this look at trying to decrease our OPEB liability, if y'all ever do decide to cancel the contract, we will need to make them whole for that, so.
May I follow up?
Yes, sir.
So I assume that the contract is 3 years with automatic renewal each of those 2 additional years? Or, yeah, 2 additional years, is that what it is?
Well, they're not automatic. Unified Government has the option to terminate.
We have the option
its
to terminate. So if we don't terminate, then it's renewed?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty standard.
And just for clarification, if we do terminate at the end of 3, then we have to go back and pay whatever they front-loaded, the difference.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I need a motion for us to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Have a motion, second. All in favor?
Aye.
To have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. And now we'll move on into our regular agenda-setting session.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir.
we have to vote on that.
Oh, I thought we did.
I thought there was a motion to go to end executive session. There was a first, there was a mover and a second, but I don't think we
Well,
voted
just in
on it.
case we didn't, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Don't want to miss anything.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. We will now move on to our agenda-setting session, and the first portion of that is our consent agenda, which are items 1 through 7. Is there anyone that would like to comment on any of those or share any information with us? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Would any commissioner like to remove anything?
Item 1, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to item number 1 for discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to go back for public input on our old and new business, and then we'll come back for the discussion on that. Would anyone like to comment on our old or new business, which are items 7 through, I believe, 17? It's 7 through 17. Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail, and we'll start with number 1 for discussion. Mr. Gertz.
Madam Mayor, I want to go ahead and leave this off consent, not because I have a problem with it, but simply because the neighborhood hasn't had a lot of conversation about this. I generally think they're going to be supportive. Both kind of primary artery traffic on College as well as cross-street traffic on Cleveland and Willows seems certainly to have increased in recent years. And it's just sightlines-wise a challenging intersection. Yes. And the four-way stop, I think, is a very intelligent way to handle this in the short term. And I'm happy to read in the agenda report that there's going to be longer-term analysis of the prospect of a roundabout there, which, again, I think makes a lot of sense, particularly given that there probably will be some future development in the area, and we can accommodate it with a roundabout. But I just want to leave it off for the purpose of allowing the neighborhood to have some input.
No problem. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this intersection getting some attention. I navigate it pretty regularly, and it's pretty hairy, especially with the speeds that are coming up. So I'm looking forward to hearing what the community has to say about it, too.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, we'll move on to item number 8, which is under old business. This is the memorandum of understanding with Mobilite. Any discussion on
Madam
that?
Mayor, I'd like
Mr.
to-
Neesmith?
Yeah, I've learned a lot this last week at ACCG. The conversation about broadband was huge. In fact, broadband was voted as the #1 legislative issue of the ones that were formed by a large margin, by a factor of 3 over any other item. And what I'm seeing is that, first of all, there's a House bill and a Senate bill that are being drafted that are about this very subject, about small cells in right-of-way. And just to let you know, I'm going to suggest that we either decline this project, this contract, or we table it indefinitely, which we probably can't do because I think the ground is changing underneath our feet as a result of what's happening in the legislature. In fact, I was told that if these bills pass, then whatever agreement we have will be null and void or very problematic because of the new rules, which I think are probably going to be favorable for us. The other reason is there's no hurry. This technology is not going to solve our problems for either low-serviced urban areas or low-service rural areas. This technology will not do that. That's all there is to it. It's just not. In fact, what will have to happen is we'll have to, in the rural areas, we'll not only have to put these small cells, but we'll also have to dig trenches for fiber to connect those cells. So we're a long way from being able to solve those problems with this technology. And so I'm going to suggest that we give the legislature a chance to do this and that we do a little more homework about this. The reason that the, not ACCG, but the other one, help me. GMA came up with a model ordinance wasn't to promote the idea. It was to prevent the problems that they had seen in a couple of locations where this technology had been put in place. For example, in Dahlonega, they wanted to put a pole right in front of an historic structure, right in the front door, because there was nothing to prevent them from doing that. So those were the kinds of things that the GMA model ordinance was designed to address. So GMA is not endorsing nor unendorsing this technology. They're just trying to give us a model in case we want it that prevents a lot of the issues that they saw in early adoptions of a right-of-way agreement. So I do want to just let you know I'm going to be asking for us to deny this contract.
Anybody else want to have any discussion on it? I have a question, Bill. The issue that Commissioner Neesmith mentioned in Dahlonega, where they're wanting to put a pole up, do we have anything that would prohibit something like that happening here if we, in fact, don't have the contracts in place?
Well, Transportation and Public Works does have a policy for encroachments in the right-of-way. And so in terms of safety, management of relationship to the other assets that are there, both other utilities and Athens-Clarke County assets, yes, there's regulations there. But if those aren't in play, then these utilities are arguing that they have the right to drop a pole wherever they want. And it could be, like in Dahlonega, that could be an aesthetic issue, not a right-of-way safety type issue.
And we don't have any height regulations at this point, do we?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check with Mr. Ressler on that.
Yeah, it'd be good for us to know that before we move forward.
Madam Mayor, there is another issue. And I don't know whether this contract had a height regulation or not. I need to go look at that again.
I think it does, doesn't it?
It does.
It does? Okay, that's the kind of thing that CMA was trying to prevent.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wouldn't want us to, because the legislature, maybe a year from now before anything goes into effect, and a lot of things could happen in a year.
My point simply is that the only beneficiary of this contract will be the provider, like Mobilite. Because our coverage, as far as I know, within where we have coverage now is adequate. So putting additional small cells along our urban streets is for their benefit. It doesn't provide us a benefit.
I understand. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't know much about the technology. I just want to see us get some kind of a giant pole in an appropriate place or something. Right. Because we don't have anything in place to prevent it. So that's why I thought it'd be good to have that information before we get to the voting
I'm hoping we'll watch this House bill and Senate bill. I'll send you the numbers later this week. Yeah. Watch these and make sure that they're adequate. I know ACCG and CMA are going to be watching them very, very carefully.
Yeah. I know GMA's been working on it for a year or so now.
Yeah.
Mr. Canby.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Commissioner Neesmith, if I may, you do raise some points about the benefits of doing this, but is there any harm in doing this for any of our constituents or I guess I'm wondering what would be the harm in allowing this to happen?
Well, there may be an aesthetic harm because they can put these small cells basically anywhere along our right-of-ways according to the contract, and they're not tiny.
They have to use existing poles from one, or is that the case, or am I wrong?
That's first, yes.
Okay.
When they first came through, when we were first presented with this, there were ideas of 100-foot plus poles or 120-foot poles. 120. Which is one reason why GMA, wanted to try to. The reason behind it was that these companies are going to be coming to all the different cities, and they're different cities with different varying abilities, and they didn't want, you know, a million different versions of this contract, so they wanted to be helpful to their membership. But we did, you know, along with them, we were a test case for that and tried to help them think through that. And the whole point is just to, you know, they do assert, and they have been they've gone to the FCC, and I think there's been some public comment on the fact that they don't need to adhere to any law or any agreement because they are utilities. They consider themselves utilities, and there's some gray area there at this point. So the reason we brought it forward was just to try to get ahead of that and try to get the most favorable position we could as we saw it for the community. But I will say this, Bill, I don't think we're asking for it to be voted on at the voting meeting. We're still waiting to talk with Mobility. We're waiting on a draft ordinance that they were wanted to suggest.
Yeah, and we're going to keep talking with GMA.
And we're also going to let y'all meet with the GMA folks and talk to them and question them further.
I think Ms. Link was next, and then you, Mr. Gertz. Oh, I thought you had your hand up, Mr. Gertz. Okay.
In general, I mean, my sense around this is sort of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. You know, I mean, we certainly don't want to do any aesthetic harm or, I mean, really create just even more jumble along our roadways. However, I mean, I certainly can say, living in town, when there are large gatherings in town, football games, or sometimes even other things, even kind of smaller events, access and coverage does become limited. And I understand that this is to provide greater coverage. And so certainly there are plenty of days when, if I'm sitting on my front porch, I don't get text messages or I can't get internet reception on my phone. That's not an unusual phenomenon. And so if this helps provide some relief to that, I mean, that certainly is a clear benefit. But, you know, given that this is new technology, I'm generally happy to move slow.
Ms. Terry, then I'll get back to you, Ms. Link. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, my question was really and follow up to what Commissioner Neesmith had said, which he's clearly knows much more about this than I do. But for our attorney, if we were to go ahead and sign a contract with these people, or any other company for that matter, and the legislature were to pass some bill, which they may or may not do, in terms of contracts, can a bill from the state legislature invalidate a contract between a local government and a third party?
I don't know that that question has ever been answered, but the utilities are certainly taking the position that if they get the legislation they want, they can do that, or their fallback position is as to facilities that are already existing and payments are being made and they're already established, but as to new facilities, they would contend that the new law would apply to the new facilities. But it's a gray area. There's been no Georgia appellate decisions on that point.
Is there federal law that,
well,
from U.S. courts of appeal that have ruled on this?
Not that I'm aware of, but GMA has a consultant, an expert attorney from Minneapolis who we're going to be consulting with on questions like this.
Okay.
Ms. Link.
I'll just attest that I could see how this kind of boost could be needed. You know, I know during the aftermath of Hurricane Irma, when most people didn't have power and were relying just on their phones for internet service, you couldn't get online. So I could see how it would be needed, but then again, I'm wary of, you know, stuff coming through the state that could offer us some better guidance. So I'm prone to want to move slow on it and see what pans out in Atlanta over the next session.
Anybody else want to talk about this before we move on? Okay, let's go on to item number 9, which is GOT Local Maintenance Improvement Grant. What's your pleasure, guys? Anybody want to speak to this? Okay, we'll move on to item number 10.
We're going to put that on consent.
Are y'all okay for that one to go on consent? Okay, great. And number 10 is the MSSAG, and I don't remember what that stands for. Somebody help me. Sidewalk project.
Sidewalks.
But what does the MMSAG stand?
Multimodal.
Okay.
Safety and Access Program Grant through DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And that's for sidewalk projects on Lexington Road, West Broad Street, South Millage Avenue, as construction plans, preliminary construction plans. Okay, y'all want to put that one on consent? Okay. Number 11 is the Land Conservation Loan Principal forgiveness on SPLOST 11, Project 28. Y'all understand that? That was a pretty good deal. Yes?
I just want to thank staff for their hard work on this, and thank the property owners who come to the table as well. I mean, I think it's going to be a significant addition to the public holdings that really is going to benefit the future Middle Laconia Greenway and other projects.
It's awesome. Mr. Williams, for the public's benefit, would you just brief us on that? Because it is an outstanding opportunity for us. So.
Yes. So the Matthews Motors property is a property we've been discussing for a couple of years now. We have a land conservation program, which was formerly the Green Space Program, which has a SPLOST project assigned to it that the voters approved in 2011. And there is a list of properties that are given priority for purchase based on a number of criteria. What staff, this was brought to the Mayor and Commission for consideration through a NOPA, Notice of Proposed Administrative Action. It was added to the Priority 1 list. What staff, and specifically Andrew Saunders and others helped to figure out was that the state had a program related to the Clean Water Act, and we're looking at projects around the state to help further those purposes. And the staff understood and made a link between the Matthews Motors Tract and this program and sent it in for evaluation. And out of 80-plus submissions, this was ranked number 5 in the state. And so the state gave a financial incentive, if you will, through the Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority to do a low-interest loan to help these projects become a reality. And in doing so, they have a partial principal forgiveness program where as soon as you undertake the loan for the purposes that further these Clean Water Act ideals, they will immediately forgive or create a grant of $125,000. So y'all will act to borrow $500, and it will immediately be $125,000 be forgiven. The interest rate is less than 1%. It's a very low interest loan, and leveraging what the voters approved and that y'all put in your tier structure, we're going to be able to leverage that grant to purchase this property. And I will add that this property is being offered to us at half its appraised value. So all the way around, this is one of those really great deals that is a culmination of a lot of work and guidance from y'all and from staff adroitly making some linkages to some programs out there.
And it adjoins other green space that we've already set aside. So staff did a great job on pulling this together. It's just amazing opportunity. Yes, sir.
They did, and it does adjoin the Rowland property, I believe, and also our property that we recently acquired along Hawthorne.
Hampton Park area.
Hampton Park,
that's right.
Phase 3 or 2, whatever 3 I think it was that we bought. And staff did do an incredible job. I've watched Mr. Saunders move through this over many months, and really they all focused on it and really did some great stuff here. So it's great.
Mr. Herod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this looks very exciting. I just have one question. And so given that this is called the Matthews Motors property, I'm assuming at some point there was some kind of motor activity on there. So
Car dealer.
Are there any environmental issues that we need to know about?
Not that we're aware of. And I will ask staff about, the phase 1, whether that was done. Phase 1 was done, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure about, well, the phase 1 will tell us what was on the property before. I don't know that, but I'll get that answer to you.
Any further discussion? Do you all want to put this on consent or leave it here where we can let Mr. Williams explain it again at our regular meeting?
Leave it where it is for now.
Yeah, I think so. I just think it's something that's worth hearing a second time. So, okay. Number 12 is biosolids hauling and disposal. I just knew you'd want to talk about that, Melissa. Go ahead.
I just, it gives me pause to know that, we're trucking this septic sewage material all the way across town for disposal in our landfill. And I'm just wondering if staff has done any research into other means of maybe reducing the amount of it, or on-site treatment. Is there any research going into that kind? I know that in some places they burn it and use it for fuel, or biogasification, or using it to create electricity, essentially, which we do at our landfill. Is there any efforts going into alternative means of dealing with this leftover product?
Yes. Yes. So this is exactly what this is meant to do. This is just a one-year contract to allow a group of staff, including both solid waste and public utilities, to look at viable alternatives to disposal, up to and including on-site, mitigation, or perhaps a private hauler, whatever, here locally. We're going to look at all that, and it's all in facts and issues 13, 14, and 16. So yes, we want to find a better way of doing this than we have in the past. We're going to look at all alternatives.
Good. That's good to know. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, Mr. Neesmith.
There's been a proposal years ago for a local entrepreneur to help dry and dispose of these biosolids as a business. And Sharon knows a bit more about it than I do, and Gary knows a lot more about it than any of us. And I'm hoping that we consider that as one of the options, is to go ahead and do what is required to give him the ability to dispose of these biosolids as a business.
We're going to consider all options, Commissioner, and if that would include, cost. It would include, environmental aspects. And one, I was pausing there earlier, Commissioner Link, because you had suggested that maybe we could reduce the amount of biosolids, and basically, they're sort of they're in excess of organisms that are created through this process, and that treatment was designed in the upgrade of the facilities back 10 years ago. So that's what we're dealing with. It's just how do we manage those better now. All options will be looked at that we can find.
So to follow up, Madam Mayor, so this is not going to block the ability for a local entrepreneur to handle these biosolids. I want to be clear about that. Okay.
No.
I don't think in any analysis that we do that we block anybody from anything.
But this is just 1 year, just to sort of get us to the next level.
It's to allow some time for analysis, and y'all will be obviously involved in any decisions that are made.
Yeah. Good. Y'all want this on consent or leave it on discussion?
I think we should leave it on discussion.
Okay.
Just because it's a sensitive subject.
Okay. Move on to item number 13, which is, it's on discussion, so all you gotta do is ask. Water distribution system leak detection services. Anybody want to talk about that one or ask questions? Consent?
Yeah.
Okay. Consent agenda, Jean. And then item number 14 is the proposed travel policy. Any discussion on that one?
Consent.
Mr.
I have one question. As somebody, let me just find where it is on the PDF. As somebody that does quite a bit of international travel myself, so under the travel policy, this is on page 88 of the PDF and page 13 of the policy. It talks about under international travel for staff on official business, ACC will cover the following costs for authorized international travel. It says bank charges for international ATM withdrawals. So there's typically two sets of charges that come with an ATM international withdrawal. There's one which is usually about a $5 to $7 fee for using a U.S. bank. And some U.S. banks have agreements with foreign banks where they will waive those. So not to give them a plug, but I know that Bank of America, for example, waives fees with certain partner banks in Europe. The other part of the fee is there's usually a 3% currency conversion fee. So is it the intent that both of those fees would be covered under this, or just the fee that you would normally pay, the $5 to $7 fee for taking money out of the hole in the wall?
Thank you for that question.
I am happy to oblige.
I will verify this, but my understanding is both of those are covered.
Okay.
And we are with Bank of America.
Okay. Well, as you know, they do have partnerships with several European banks and certainly banks in Australia and New Zealand as well. So, okay, good.
Any other discussion?
I would just like to point out too, again, for the public and for others that, you know, I want to again recognize staff that, you know, this hasn't been looked at in a long time, and they've dove in there and they've come up to update it, and they've made some other changes that help it to, you know, instead of being a static per diem, they've tied it to the General Services Administration Federal Government Index, so that, you know, if you travel to different parts of the country, there are different price sensitivities, and it's just a lot more modern, and I appreciate them and their work.
This is very similar to UGA's policy.
I have a couple of questions, if y'all don't mind. One is the travel credit card. Is that different from a P card? Because I've never used either.
Yes.
So it's totally different. Because I know there was some discussion of possible audit of the P card process and the auditing.
The P card is issued to certain folks for just normal purchasing. If you were to get a travel card, you would notify finance of your upcoming conference, and they would preload the travel card with all the expenses that you anticipated. And then you would still have to come back with itemized expenses, but it would keep you from using your personal credit card. It keeps us from having to cut checks in advance and get cash and then reconcile cash on the way back. It's just a more efficient use.
And then one other question, because the wording, it says replaces the current 40 meal per diem. And then it says, I'm trying to reread it right quick. But anyway, then it says meal purchases would require an itemized receipt. Is that if it's in addition to or outside the per diem?
No, it's as part of your per diem, you would need to provide. We're not just giving you $40.
Okay.
You know, the per diem is going away. You're gonna, you know, you're kind of held within what the GSA is indexed, but you need to provide itemized.
So if you went outside like the normal dinner amount, but you were lowering your breakfast, you'd still get compensated as long as it was within the $40.
No, I think you have to stay within the confines of each of those. It's a per meal issue.
Okay. Seems a little restrictive. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I had something I asked the manager in the spirit of transparency. I guess I wanted to mention this. I had asked the manager on page 17 of the online, I guess the PDF, item 19, non-authorized miscellaneous expenses. It said alcoholic beverages except as approved by the manager, and so I just asked him, so when exactly would those be approved? And his answer was
never.
Economic development probably would be the main. I mean, you know, we're bringing somebody in and that kind of thing. So I just thought it was interesting that they put that in there, because I can remember years back when that wasn't the case. So.
Well, if it's the mayor going, it'll be never. So
that would be the only case.
Sure. Yes, sir. Okay.
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind if I have a question.
I would love somebody else to have a question besides me.
Okay. And I certainly don't have a problem with the policy. I guess what I was
just clarifying.
Just wanting to make a comment on, or even a question, is I know a lot of, and this comes up with sometimes on the ADDA, whenever somebody goes to a conference, you know, and the taxpayers are paying for it, or whoever's paying for it, you know, we don't, I mean, it'd be nice if maybe, well, you know, if we could get some report back or something, and I don't know that we need it for every conference, but it just, you know, I'm just sometimes curious about, well, what'd you learn on that conference? Yeah, what'd you learn on that conference that's gonna help our community, or was there something of interest or not? Yeah, and, or was it a waste of time? You know, something to that effect, just so that there may be some good idea that came out of it that this body may want to explore. I mean, that's kind of the reason why you go to these conferences, is to figure out what other people are doing and how it make it work here, or share what we're doing and what sort of comments you received on that. So I just think that'd be helpful for us, of those that don't get to go on the conference, so we can live vicariously through those that, that are.
I actually expect some of that goes on the department level.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure
And
it does. So I
in
don't,
fact, Mr. Neesmith just talked to us about some things that he learned, so.
I learned so much.
yeah, and I know we do it a lot of times as a board, and we probably should do it more as a
Oh, yeah.
board as well, but just from the department's sake, it might be helpful for us to see some of that from time to time as well.
Yeah, good. Want to leave that on consent, or you want to keep talking about it? Consent? Okay, consent, Jean. Item number 15, I've never been sure, I've always seen this in writing, this is Tweedale or Tweedle? Tweedale Properties Incorporated and RTSH Holdings to initiate a roadway abandonment process for Elbert Street. Any discussion on that one? Yes, sir.
One of the reasons we sent this PD back was because, I remember anyway, I said I wanted to see how this project interfaced with the Firefly Trail. And because that might have an impact on where or how we handle Elbert Street. Well, we haven't seen that. We have not seen any detail about how it will interface with Firefly Trail. So I'm very reluctant to go ahead and abandon this property until we see what kind of impact that might have on our options for interfacing with the Firefly Trail.
Well, we still have time because this just starts the process. This has to stay on our regular agenda. So can y'all get that information for Mr.
Well,
Neesmith,
I
for all
mean,
of us?
it
Yes, sir.
requires some work, and I haven't seen it happen yet. It requires some work,
Okay.
some design work, and hadn't been done.
Oh. Mr. Manager, can you give us any insight before I get to Mr.?
Well, I defer to Mr. Harrod first.
Oh, okay.
Thank you,
So
Madam
Andy's
Mayor.
got the
So the
answer.
Rails to Trails Committee did actually meet with representatives of the Quick Trip, and some of our staff were there as well. And there was some based upon the feedback from the Rails to Trails Committee, there was some modification made to the original plan, and it's a little bit tricky to see, but if you zoom in on the plan, in the top right-hand corner of the diagram, as it is on the computer screen, there was some discussion about not having a switchback path coming from what is on Albert Street now up into the back of the facility, and instead having a more kind of serpentine
Oh, I see that.
path, and that has been included. There was also some discussion, which seems to be this circle next to it as the plaza. So there have been some modifications made to the plan based upon feedback from the Rails to Trails Committee. One of the discussions also that we had, and certainly the manager probably knows a little bit more about this than I do, at least if he's talked with our leisure services people. So there was some concern about who would pick up litter around the picnic area, whatever you want to call it. And I believe that there was going to be some agreement wherein Quick Trip would pick up the litter, but if for some reason they were not fulfilling that we would have the right to enter onto their property to do it on their behalf. Are you familiar with that?
No,
No?
but I can ask.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with the latest discussions on who's responsible for the litter,
Okay.
but you are,
Commissioner Dickinson was there. Is that your recollection as well?
Yeah, well, the discussion was where to place the plaza. Should we place it on the right-of-way? Because if it was on the right-of-way, then the leisure services or our crew, other crews would have to do it. But there was a desire by the citizens and those present to move it away from the right, move it down to make it more like a picnic area around the grass and whatnot. And by doing so, that then transfers the responsibility to the private landowner to do it. And so the concern was whether or not they'd keep it up, and that's what that sort of bore out that conversation, about there should be an agreement about if it's not, that we can get it if we're out, so.
You might want to talk to Kent.
I'll do that.
Mr. Gerst, do you want to say something?
I do, and I think I'd probably direct this at Attorney Berryman more than anyone. I know there's been some question about ownership of the former rail bed, and so it's my understanding that generally speaking, when there's street abandonment, that abandonment, then can go to the adjoining property owners on either side if there are two separate property owners. And of course, you see the center line sort of indicated lightly here in the dashed line. So do we know definitively that a segment of this abandoned Albert Street would go to the unified government as developer of Firefly or not? Or is that still unclear?
I've asked that question myself, and my hesitancy is because I've not been able to get a good plat of where everything is. And first of all, there's not necessarily an automatic reverter upon the abandonment of a street. The state law says that it can be sold, and you can negotiate values, much like we did when we abandoned Hancock. But as I understand it, Athens-Clarke County's right-of-way will have some right-of-way that adjoins the abandoned part of it. We just need a good, accurate survey to know that, of where the trail's going to be, where the old railroad right-of-way is. We just need a good survey.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And I guess to kind of follow up on that point about how the abandonment then opens the doorway to this negotiation rather than, simply, without exchange of money, abandoning equal portions to the northern and southern adjacent owners. I mean, it appears from this plat that the fuel center needs relatively little of the right-of-way compared to everything that's there in totality. And so I guess what I'd say to all of us is that my preference would be to negotiate for sale of as little as necessary for the project to move forward, particularly knowing that there may be some future iterations of Firefly and future amenities that we may want to have the ability to put in place on the remaining portion, if that makes sense.
Could I just add, too, that because of the realignment of Old Winterville Road, we're not certain what DOT is going to require, what Athens-Clarke County might be required. So there might still be some room for negotiation just on all of that relocation as well.
I'd like to add this, that as I understand it, there have been some more recent versions of the plan submitted to the Planning Commission that at first glance may seem to address all the issues that the Rails to Trails Committee brought up, and that the abandonment process is a two-step process. And so if you take action on this now, it doesn't mean that it's a done deal. The second part will come in the next cycle along with that PD approval. So you'll see all that in the next cycle. We were just teeing it up from a timing perspective. And I will say, we've talked about it as well, and we certainly need to be aware and protective of the interest of the trail. It does further another public purpose of helping to align that intersection with, by preserving that land, and I think that's an important safety improvement, as well as connecting the Firefly over to the trails that's coming out of the park and ride.
Anybody else? Y'all want to leave that on discussion, or?
Yes. We have to.
Okay, that's right, we do, yeah. Item number 16 is the county library improvements, and this is automated materials handling system. Y'all may remember we saw this in a work session. Any discussion on it? Consent? Okay.
We haven't gotten the bids.
Oh, we hadn't got the bids yet, okay. So we'll have to leave this one. And then number 17 is our items for our local delegation. And Mr. Neesmith.
I sent everybody by email late mid-afternoon, commission defined option or another proposal, which took all the stuff that we had originally, reformatted it just a bit, but also inserted, instead of Sharon's sales tax items, I put in the very items that ACCG has on their list of options. I thought it'd be a good idea of legislative issues. I thought it'd be a good idea to cover that much waterfront. They're really good. They put a lot of real in the woods kinds of considerations in there, and for it to be worded like theirs, just to reinforce theirs. And we can talk about what those particulars are if you want. Does anybody want to discuss what those are?
Did you happen to look to see if, how those interact with the GMA policy? Because I know GMA also has a policy,
I did not.
so it might be a good
I did
idea
not.
to see if there's any.
But they basically,
I believe, as I recall, they're very close, but.
I'm sure that they are, but I mean, I'm not that sure, but I
Yeah.
suspect that they are. But it addresses services as being something that we might want to look, that the legislature might want to be looked as taxable. Digital goods, I mean, used to you'd buy a record or a CD and you get a sales tax, now you download it and you don't. More flexible use of the sales taxes for maintenance of capital facilities, for example. Disclosure of local sales tax information is a big one. Here they're saying that the state needs to report to us enough information so that we can determine where the sales tax is coming from. That way we can do more precise economic development planning, you know, see where taxes are going up, see where taxes are going, tax collections are going down. That's a big part of it. And also for internet sales, for the vendor to provide us with more information about who bought that item, right down to the street address. Because right now, for example, we don't know. Bogart is a huge postal district. It's not a political district, it's a postal district. So I'm buying things online, and I don't know whether Bogart is getting my sales tax or Clark County is getting our sales tax. And they don't know either. They don't know. So we got to solve those kinds of problems. So it's a bigger issue than.
I'd actually like to see something even more granular than that, and I don't know whether it's possible or not. And that's for us to have total access to our sales tax information, because I know, well, I've always believed that our local people do a better job of it. That we, you know, I don't know whether that's true in all counties or not, but I think it would be in Athens-Clarke County. But for instance, I think they only have maybe 3, maybe up to 6 now, auditors for the whole state. And I remember a number of years ago, the Revenue Commissioner saying one of the biggest offenders were convenience stores. And in a local community, if we had the granular information so we could see this convenience store is paying this much sales tax, this one's paying another amount, they were very different, and we would know those convenience stores and know whether one of them need to be audited or not, and the state will never get to that level. So, you know, I'd like to see something even more than that, but this would be a good
Yes,
start.
and I think you'll see that item 3 under item D, which is sales taxes, disclosure of local sales tax information, that part of it is that we're inhibited for the public is inhibited from knowing sales tax collections from a particular location. But if we could see it and under, you know, confidentiality agreement.
Absolutely.
This requires that we actually see the address that's collecting the tax.
And there's no reason for us not to, because we get that information in property tax for personal property tax. And it's confidential, and it's held in the tax assessor's office. And I don't know why we couldn't be trusted with the sales tax information, so. But that,
So the other one to add was stormwater management. It seems that our local senator has written a bill that will void our ability to collect stormwater fees. And this is an issue for us to say, no, don't do that.
I think there's going to be some hearings on that we need to be participating in. Mr. Harry, did you want to add? Or?
I mean, I don't really have much to add. I mean, I agree that it would be nice if the Department of Revenue would actually share some of their information with us so that we can make sure that sales tax is being. Sorry?
Make sure we're getting our fair share.
Yes,
Yeah.
to make sure that it's collected appropriately and fairly, because for everybody that fiddles on their taxes, not providing the appropriate sales tax, that means that somebody else picks up the tab for that. So it's a matter of fairness of having accurate tax records.
It's fairness, but it's also a loss of revenue for the state as well as the local.
Well, I know,
Yeah.
and so that means that everybody's taxes go up because of that lost revenue. So if the Department of Revenue would be more forthcoming, that would be helpful. I was just going to say that I appreciated what Commissioner Neesmith put together here. I thought he did a good job. I think it looks nice. The only thing that we might want to discuss since he put it together is we did get a memo from the chief, and it looks like he had 20 issues which he rather unequally divided between pro and con on item number E. So obviously we make the final decision, but I think it's important
Yeah,
to
you talk
have
about that one.
feedback.
Yeah. Just to finish, I added a couple more things. Telecommunications Excise Tax, you can read that. This is trying to put a tax structure together so that so that we can benefit from telecommunications excise tax, and another one was fees on property tax bills. Apparently, there's a movement to prevent us from putting fees on our property tax bills, like what?
Well, like we do now with our.
Solid waste?
Well, we're not doing solid waste, but we are doing some water bill fees for water
Right.
extension.
Right,
lines.
so anyway, this is to encourage the legislature not to mess that up for us.
Exactly. Yeah.
I believe there was a bill that was in the legislature last year related to that, and it was, as you say, it was to prevent putting more than one fee on the property tax bill, and it simply meant that local governments had to spend more money.
Yeah, to collect it.
Well, providing two bills, printing two bills, because the property tax bill could only have the property tax. And so not only is that
So
more costly,
apparently
but it's
that-
using a lot more paper.
Apparently that legislation is alive.
Oh, it's back alive again?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I hadn't read it yet, but I will. I was in a meeting until just before we got here, so. Ms. Link?
Yeah, in light of the memo we got from the chief of police about this request to allow bars to serve till 2:55 a.m. on Saturday nights, I think we should reconsider that. And I also would like to hear from Solid Waste about that, because they do a lot of work late at night cleaning up after those bars, and I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this without hearing from our Solid Waste department.
I actually did get that. It was after I sent it out, and have to find that, but I will relay that to you. There were some concerns about that as far as staffing. That, we obviously be working an extra hour, and it may cause some shifts to move. But I'll give you that specific. I'll forward it to all of you tomorrow.
Any further discussion on this one? Okay, Mr. Griffin, if you'll come forward and help us with our planning items.
Wait a minute, no, this is not.
No, you did a good job.
That's all for that.
I meant to keep it open, but I.
Okay. We started originally coming out of Planning Commission with 5 items. We're down to 3 this evening. The rezoning item that was originally off of Timothy Road and Epps Bridge has been withdrawn by the applicant in advance of the legal ad, so you will not see that one this evening. We're also going to the personal care home. We would like to take back one more time really quickly the Planning Commission. We've got a couple other changes that they're minor, but we think it will provide a better amendment to you when it comes. Those were in different sections than where the Planning Commission saw, so I would ask that I be allowed to take it back at their November meeting, get those included in it, and it'll come right back up to you in your November, December cycle. So that leaves us with 3 this evening. First item is a request to rezone property from RM2 Airport and Commercial General Airport to a Commercial General Airport straight rezone with a land use amendment, 448 Georgia Drive and 410 Oak Street. Change from neighborhood mixed use to quarter business on the land use side, and then the zoning, as I mentioned. There was an offer in the applicant's application of a binding site plan. But as we explained in our report to you, we can't get them into a binding plan if that plan doesn't meet all of the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And in this case, there were some things They weren't necessarily wrong, they had not completed the final design to an extent where we needed it to be. So the issue of a binding plan is really off the table. That's not something you even have the ability to do as part of a straight rezone if there are waivers associated with it. But we've tried to pick up the areas that we thought were important to you, and the Planning Commission has as well through conditions of an approval if you see fit. You see the property here. It's located at the intersection of Oconee Street and Oak Street. Split zoned right now. You see the zoning line being right down the center, this dark black line. It's commercial general already to the north and RM2 to the south. Request is to basically put it all into a commercial general designation. As you see, I think it's on the next one, but ultimately it would be a change and a change to the future development map as well. This is the existing site as seen from Oak Street. The proposal ultimately would be to expand that parking area back into the area that you see with the undergrowth and the trees. Georgia Drive. Pardon me? There was a building back there. The building is, no, it's actually,
Back in the
that's on the other side of Georgia Drive.
The house is up
The
there.
house is, yes. And you can see it better,
Okay.
you know, because you're looking at the back of the building is in the front right here. That's current condition of Georgia Drive. A section of that was abandoned some time ago and is being included as part of this rezone. And then the Oconee Street frontage, this is from within the Carsville neighborhood looking back down towards Oak Street. So the subject property is on the left, and that is the area that we were concerned with ensuring that there was a buffer left along Oconee Street there of at least 20 feet in width undisturbed, and they are certainly willing to provide that as part of any future development. You see here on the left and the right the proposed future land use change to corridor business. And this is the same land use designation that was recently granted by this group for the Quick Trip. While the plan was sent back, the land use map amendment was deemed appropriate and approved. And then the zoning change from the RM2, which is brown here, to the red commercial general. This is a proposed plan, again, non-binding. I think it's fine to say that while this is a commercial general rezone, which means that any proposed use that is currently permitted under CG is allowed, the intent at this point is to relocate the enterprise, which is car rental, which is just up the street, into a larger location where they have more parking and more vehicle storage for their business. And that is really what is driving this request. So the recommendations to you from the Planning Commission with regard to the future development map change is an approval, and with regard to the rezoning, it's an approval with conditions. You see those listed below. We need to have a combination plat that is required, put together. There will be right-of-way dedication required along with the frontage sidewalk along Oak Street, which is understood, 20-foot undisturbed buffer along Oconee. And we also ask that they observe a minimum 30-foot maximum building height as measured along the Oconee Street frontage, because you can go up to, I think it's 65 feet in commercial general with the building, and that the potential impact of that height adjacent to the Carsville neighborhood, we wanted to ensure some protection. And so with that, the recommendation to you from your Planning Commission with a unanimous vote was to approve with those 4 conditions.
And this is Allison's district. She's not here. Anybody else have any concerns or Mr.
So the
Smith?
30-foot maximum height, does that apply to Oak Street as well?
No, just as
Just the parcel, even though they're combined, that's now on Oconee Street?
we would, in the way it was worded, I believe specifically was we would measure it from the grade elevation along Oconee Street of any building. Because there is a significant grade change up to Oconee Street, so we didn't want them building at that point in the back of the property up and then going up from that point 65.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that was my concern, was the height, and I know that the CG height allowance is about 6 stories. But also my concern is about the setbacks. What is the setback along each of these frontages?
I mean, the setback along Oak Street at this point would be 0. I mean, there is no front yard setback in commercial general Let me double check that. No, I think it's 0 side and rear and 10 in the
So
front.
on Oak Street, they could go
They could go up close to the
six
street on
stories
Oak.
right up to the sidewalk.
But there's a sidewalk.
But there is a sidewalk required to be put
Which is
in. Along Oconee Street, it would be a minimum setback of 20 feet because there's a 20-foot undisturbed buffer along that Oconee Street frontage to the rear.
But right there, like right on Oak Street, you could have 6 stories right up on the sidewalk, like we're seeing with the hotel on Millage, the new hotel.
Yeah, and yes, but I would point out to you that they could do that today. I mean, the Oak Street
It's
property is already
CG,
zoned that
yeah.
way.
Brad, I was glad to see the explicit language recommended by the Planning Commission about the sidewalk on Oconee Street. We're just talking about how that's one of those sort of pig paths that we often notice as kind of you head through town with people walking the grass. On that frontage, would street trees be required as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And I will tell you, with regard to the sidewalk, that is an impact to this property. That, with regard to the fact that it's already, there's an existing condition there. Now, once you get over that 25% expansion of a site, it requires and it kicks in those changes to be made. But, it will, based on the existing parking configuration and the intended use, there will be some reconfiguration required in order to get that sidewalk in, but we felt very strongly that, that is needed in that area. And we have sidewalk connection to the east along Oconee Street already in place.
So Brad, just so I'm clear, the current plan is to combine these two properties so that they can have more parking for the, I guess it's Enterprise, is that who's out there? So what happens at some future point if Enterprise wants to move or, it closes or whatever? Would they have to come back and do anything?
No, I mean, they are subject to the conditions that would be approved as part of your legislation if you saw fit to approve this. But any otherwise approved commercial general use could be built, provided that it met underlying design standards.
So if they were to come back 10 years from now and say, we want, the car rental business isn't working out, we want to build a building there, is that still restricted to the 30 feet or whatever it was that's in here, or would it go under the regular commercial general regulations?
No, the restriction on building height is not tied to any of the uses. So if they came back or if they came in almost immediately with something different, the 30-foot height as measured from the elevation along Oconee Street is in place regardless of what they would build.
Okay, even 10 years from now?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it would become a condition of your ordinance, and I have no authority to even interpret that one without sending it back to you.
Maybe I missed it, but what's the mitigating plan for stormwater? Do they have to do,
They're going to have to provide stormwater under the ordinance. There are no waivers associated with it. So if it means, a lot of cases with these infill lots, they go underground, which is an expense, but it's given the restricted nature of these types of sites, that's really their only option, to provide what they're required to.
okay.
Commissioner Dickerson just jogged my memory. This is one of the areas where there've been some general conversation during the corridor study about doing some kind of collective stormwater mitigation, potentially on the other side of Highway 78. I know that that's under discussion by staff generally, and maybe Blaine, I'll direct to you whether this is still an area where they're considering, if you could just let us know.
And you're speaking of the regional stormwater detention studies? Just knowing the topography here, it's got challenges, as you go to Plan North, I think it's all uphill, up to Cars Hill. And this is true of our corridors, as we all know. We've got shallow lots, which really kind of inhibit the type of development that can happen there. So I would say it would be difficult, and I can confirm with Drew and get his professional opinion, this might be a difficult place to try to site a regional stormwater facility.
I think the thought was sort of on the other side of the highway, somewhat adjacent to the Firefly. kind of along, is that Inglewood or?
I think that's, when you start looking at the Oconee Street area in terms of regional stormwater, I think that's where it starts, you start pinpoint is closer into town, other side of the road is really where you get into opportunities more. And I don't think if and when there is a regional system built in that location, that it would afford this any relief, given its location. Okay. Next item is a special use request in an RS-25 zone located at 780 Timothy Road. Subject property at the intersection of Rambling Road and Timothy. Proposal is for an expansion of the church that is currently in place. It's about a 2,700 square foot addition. They are in desperate need of additional parking for their congregation, and they are asking for a total of 45 additional spaces on an undeveloped part of the lot. There are also some additional new spaces within the existing parking lot that is in place between the structure and Rambling Road. Single parcel, almost 8 acres in size, and there are 4 variances associated with this request. Those are to allow parking in the front yard, and this is really an expansion of an existing parking lot that is driving that variance. The reduction of the required 15-foot buffer across street frontage from a single-family district is also really a result of expanding an existing non-conforming lot that has no real room to put that buffer in place without losing parking in order to do it. A lot coverage from 25% to 30%, and a request to not be required to install public sidewalk along the Timothy Road frontage. It's the subject property you see here. It's an old conditional use under the previous ordinance, and the request is to go to a special use under our current code in the RS-25 zone. See here, this is the proposed site plan. The areas that are shaded in the dark are the additions. You see the building addition here, a large kind of plaza public patio space out in front, and then you see these added spaces in this location, and then the new lot here. Those are all the proposed additions. That new lot, as we've described in the report, is a combination of pervious asphalt and I think a pervious gravel type paving system. Final design's not in place, so I can't give you specific details, but it would have to meet our requirements for, it's not just a gravel parking lot. It is a constructed gravel lot with drains underneath and the ability to retain water. Planning Commission recommendations on this one with regard to the special use was to approve along with the 4 variances you see listed, and we've given you detail in the reports. The staff recommendation, really because of the lot coverage and sidewalk variances, that we didn't feel like we were able to send forward a positive recommendation on variances, was really the only thing driving our recommendation to them for consideration of denial. With a special use, you could not approve a special use unless you see it appropriate to grant any variances associated with it. And so the Planning Commission, in their consideration, felt appropriate to recommend the 4 variances and then the associated special use permit. And it was a unanimous vote on all 5 votes that were taken.
Is that your district, Diane?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's hard to go on there, okay.
I do want, may I say something now that you've mentioned that? Back in the summer, the lady that was a very strong part of developing the beginnings of this church was Ann Woodruff, and she was one of the first women in real estate in Athens-Clarke County, and was quite an awesome person. And I will warn you now, if we don't get this moved forward, she'll come back and haunt you, I do believe, because this was something that she really, really, really cared about very much.
Mr. Henry, do you want to say something?
Yes, ma'am, I sure do. Thank you, Commissioner Bell. Yes, sir, yes. But I defer to Commissioner Bell on that, so.
We share a lot of things.
Yeah. I did go to attend the Planning Commission meeting on this, and as you can expect, the variance that took up a lot of the discussion was the one on the sidewalk. The petitioner for this, or the petitioner's representative, Josh Coons, did a good job explaining about the stormwater aspects of this, and I think he also made some convincing points about the variance for the sidewalk. And I don't know if there's a slide in here, I don't recall seeing one of the topography of this particular piece and why they're asking for the variance on the sidewalk. If you have a chance to go by there in the next couple of weeks before we vote on it, take a look at it, because it would be a difficult piece of property for a right-of-way sidewalk, which is, you know, certainly most of our, if not all of our planning commission staff members and planning staff and planning commissioners certainly recognize the importance of sidewalks in our community. And so this one did generate a lot of conversation, but at the end of the day, they recognize that of the difficulty of putting a sidewalk here, as we do when we go and put sidewalks in place for the county. Recognize some of the difficulties associated with that. I did have a question, though, however, and I know this came up during the discussion, and I believe the petitioner was willing to put a sidewalk easement down on their property, but it required them to I guess, advocate or give a right-of-way, make that a right-of-way thing. So is there a reason why they couldn't just do an easement but still maintain ownership of the property? Like
I mean, I think, and we looked at it from a staff standpoint too, but I think there are policies in place with regard to, I mean, they would either have to dedicate all of it as right-of-way in order for us to go in and do the maintenance on it versus just an easement. And I think where it would make sense on this one to put a sidewalk within an easement would have not even been an immediate adjacent right-of-way, I don't believe. I think you would have actually ended up with an edge of right-of-way private property and then had to place an easement, because you're probably, you know, you're getting all the way over into here before you get to a point where it's appropriate topography. I think they even offered as one of their options this sidewalk. Basically, if you took this one, shifted it to this side of the parking lot and then tied it in,
right,
you know, could we just, from this point, you know, sign it or something and allow the public to come down and go across? We really don't have a good way to do that and make it a truly public sidewalk.
okay.
And I think the planning commission saw that issue too.
And I also got, and I think the planning commission did too, asking them to donate it to the right-of-way, that takes away from their property, which I think probably might affect.
And it would have increased in their needed variance on lot coverage.
It would, yeah, so it was kind of a lose situation for them. So at any rate, I just wanted to point that out to y'all. That's why that variance is in there. And hopefully you can see fit to approve the project, and at some point, we're gonna have to address the sidewalk sooner rather than later. I hope the sidewalk issues on Timothy, and perhaps the other side of the street might be more applicable to a sidewalk for this stretch. Which also leads to just one more point. Another reason why maybe possibly a sidewalk bank at some point in the future would be helpful.
Mike, in his last comments, actually noted what I think is kind of worth considering, which is that, you know, we often have these topographic challenges where, you know, it's not reasonable for anybody, public or private, to put a sidewalk given the cliff-like nature of the edge of that property along Timothy Road. But particularly given that you've got an engaged applicant here who very much wants to see pedestrian access along the corridor, that if we had that sidewalk bank, which I know would mean that we'd have to undertake some impact fee ordinances, that would get us literally further down the road with amenities that people in the area want.
Ms. Dickerson and then Ms. Lane.
Yeah, so attached to this was a letter from a neighbor about stormwater concerns, and I guess I'm kind of curious as to, I guess, two things. First of all, there's some allegations that maybe the current measures are not being, the current proper measures are not being taken, and maybe we haven't made sure that they're following the rules. So my question is has that been addressed? And then secondly, how are we going to ensure that they're going to do it properly in the future if that is currently the case? And I don't know who wants to answer that.
I can answer that, I believe, and Brad can help me with it. But it has been addressed. Josh Coons addressed that at the meeting, and actually the property owner that wrote that letter had it in the packet before the meeting and was there speaking in favor of this project at the meeting.
Okay.
So,
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Link.
Just returning to the sidewalk thing, it's certainly not logical to put a sidewalk along the roadside. It's a sharp cliff down into the property. And I can see how, you know, this is a property that could be conducive to that kind of cut through, but I guess, I mean, even as it stands, this design is conducive to that, but we can't mandate that kind of thing because of it's mandating a public right-of-way through private property. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I think the biggest issue with this one was, you know, not whether or not, it may be possible that the church is willing to, you know, to do some additional work in terms of allowing or, you know, making it easier for pedestrian access through the property. But for it to qualify as the required public sidewalk for purposes of the ordinance, we really didn't have a way to put it way down there through their property. And for it to become a public right-of-way too, you potentially get into some other issues in terms of having to split the property, and then you're calculating on different sides, and yeah, the options that they thought may work still didn't meet the needs of what they would need for a variance.
Anybody else? Okay, move on to
Okay.
the last one.
Last item is a special use in a commercial office, Millage Avenue corridor overlay. I'm not sure we've done one quite like this before. The proposal is a single-family house on Millage that is proposed to be built. Current parcel is a little over 1.25 acres. It has an existing home on it now that is owned by the applicant, who has recently purchased it, remodeled it, and is currently living in the house and wishes to subdivide the property and build a new house to the front of it. Because they are creating a new lot in a commercial zone under the ordinance to build for the purposes of single-family construction, they're required to ask for a special use permit. And this was really a product of the 2006-07, when we were starting to see significant areas of our commercially zoned properties being platted and developed as single-family neighborhoods, and started to have concerns with losing our commercially zoned properties, that we put this in place. And what our ordinance says today is that if you have an existing lot of record that was in place at the time that ordinance amendment occurred 10 years ago, and you want to build a house on it, you can by right. But if you create a new lot, then you have to get a special use permit. In order for the applicant here to build a new house, he has to create the new lot, which means he has to ask for the special use. So that's what gets us here. It is a special use, meaning report and plan, if approved, become binding with some of the other ones that you have reviewed in the past, because this is in a historic district as well. You really, if you were to approve this, you're approving footprint of the house, the size, the general shape of it, but this is all subject still to final approval of architecture and site plan design by our Historic Preservation Commission. So if there were any significant changes to the layout, it may ultimately come back to you, but modifications of architecture, if that were to occur, I think it is understood that would not be required to come back simply for changing the look of the home. So you see the property here, corner of Woodlawn and Millage. You see an aerial there, and then from the Millage Avenue right-of-way looking through the property to the existing house. And then this is the proposed site plan. You see the proposal is to subdivide the lot, but serve both houses by one shared driveway, and then construct to the front. And the recommendations from the Planning Commission are to approve based on the following two reasons you see there. There also is, there was a fairly extensive tree plan. The Millage Avenue corridor has a fairly restrictive tree component to it under the special district overlay. There are a handful of trees on the property that are largely black cherries that are right at the 8 or 9 inch caliper that are in the front yard that they are looking at possibly removing. If that were to occur, they would have to mitigate with new plantings in accordance with the ordinance. They are not asking for any type of a variance on tree removal in association with the construction of this house if it were to be approved. And the recommendation was for approval.
Ms. Bell,
Yes, I would like to give a little bit of an insight on where some of this traveled. this was inherited to someone that made a promise at the time that she was given this property, that it would remain a residential, that it would not be going into a development of business or apartments, condos even at all, and she stuck to that promise, and she's done a great job with the first house. I've been to it, not in it, but it's really, and the people there in the neighborhood, the Woodlawn and Springdale, Cloverhurst, all of those appreciate this being given that respect. So I know that they give us their nod on what we would be allowing to happen with this property.
That's good.
Thank you.
Mike, and then come back to you.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. And this is one of those areas where Commissioner Bell represents one side of the street, and I represent the other side of the street. And
I've got the good side.
But I will say this about the project and about some of the comments I heard on the at the Planning Commission was that, Millage Avenue really doesn't, they have just a few homes along Millage Avenue that, for single families, that a few families do live in, and I think it's actually probably a good thing that, and some of the planning commissioners mentioned this as well, that there is a development along here that will offer single family opportunity for Millage Avenue, which once used to be really a street of single families, as you could probably imagine. And I think it'll help balance out the use along Millage Avenue from fraternities and sororities from offices or restaurants to another single family. So it's encouraging.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have one quick question. Did I hear you correctly say that there will be a shared driveway?
Yes.
So I thought we were trying to move away from shared driveways. Is that an issue?
I think we have significantly been trying to move away from shared driveways for the purpose of creating lots without frontage.
Okay.
Where you're stacking in behind each
Okay.
other. In this case, it simply makes sense, provide some screening, and
Okay.
their long-term plan is they remain family property anyway, so
Okay.
it just needed to be on 2 lots in order for it to be a single-family residence.
Ms. Dickerson.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out something. I don't really have an issue with this, but I think it's interesting for policy's sake. Last week at one of our comp plan meetings, there was a resident there who I've been working with for several years, who pointed out that something like this can't even happen on his property, and he has almost 8 acres because he's in the AR zone. And it's just sort of an inequity. I know we have a policy, and that's some of the things I hope we're going to address in the land use plan. But, when you can go in and take 1.29 acre and split it into two pieces, but you can't out in the district where I live, it doesn't seem really equitable. So hopefully it's something we can address at some point, so.
Excellent.
I think this is a logical proposal. I mean, this is the kind of place where you do want to see, more density. And we certainly have a need for more lots for single-family homes in our in-town neighborhoods, because that's where the demand is highest. So what we're looking at approving is just the footprint. Those elevations that were attached don't really apply. The HPC is going to deal with all that. Okay, and so this zoning, this commercial office zoning, that would not allow any conversion, down the line to a multifamily use, say 10, 20 years from now, you have a big house that they want to divide into multiple units that.
Well, I can tell you, under today's ordinance, it would not allow it. I can't give you any assurance what the ordinance looks like in 20 years, but, the difference between a planned development, and I've told you this before, between a planned development and a special use is the special use permit grants under a binding plan an additional use to all the other uses that are otherwise permitted. So, if they were to build this, and we've looked at that. It was something that we reviewed. What about a conversion at some point down the road? We've got a big house and it's going to be converted, whether it's apartments, under today's ordinance, you can't do ground floor residential without coming back to you. If it were converted to office, there is nowhere near the ability to park this and provide adequate parking for it. Same, a fraternity or sorority would be back as a special use. I don't see any real opportunity on this property, if this home is built, to administratively convert to anything else without ultimately having to be back in front of this group to ask for either some type of exception or special use.
Okay.
You just can't park it.
I was just curious.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished, Ms. Link?
I think so, yeah.
Andrew?
Mr. Griffin answered my question.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Y'all ready to call it a night?
I'm ready.
If that's our business, so we're going to executive session.
Are we going in? Can we have executive session?
We have an executive.